Welcome to the Woman's Connection. I'm Barrie-Louise Switzen, your moderator. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned? Welcome to my show. I'm Barrie-Louise Switzen. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power. Our guest today is Dr. Barbara Lane. She is a woman who helps people with their problems today and tomorrow by looking into their past. And I would like to welcome Barbara Lane. Barbara, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Barrie.
It's wonderful. You've got such an eclectic background. Why don't we start with what you really started out and then bring everybody up to where you are today?
Well, Barrie, I'd like to tell you this funny incident that happened to me one time. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, and I happened to be walking down the street with a friend of mine. I was carrying a resume, and I had done some of those little exercises about some of my different careers and things like that. I had a computer printout, and all of a sudden the computer printout fell on the ground, and it just went page after page after page, and my friend burst out laughing. She was flabbergasted. She couldn't believe anybody had ever done so many things. And
well.
I have done so many things, and at some points in my life I've wondered if they would all gel, and they're finally gelling. I started out as studying history as a teacher, and then moved into flight attendant. I wanted to be a flight attendant. I wanted to travel around the world and see and experience things and cultures and countries. And while I was doing that, I got exposed to philosophies and religions around the world that I would have never heard. I grew up in a very conservative Midwest Catholic background, never heard the concept of reincarnation at all, only got acquainted with it as I was traveling. And then after traveling, I became an anchor and reporter. I got into telecommunications, and actually there was a carryover because I love change and I love variety, and that's the same thing that broadcasting offered.
Certainly does.
So I just had a wonderful experience, everything being from I covered nuclear power plants, oil rigs, movie stars, shuttle launches. It was really
very dull life.
Yes, it was just so boring.
But today you're doing
Clinical hypnotherapy.
Thank you. Clinical hypotherapy. No.
Hypnotherapy.
Hypnotherapy. Okay, we'll get it. How did you get to that level, starting that?
Well, I've always, as a hobby, been interested in the power of the mind. Okay. What about the power of the mind? And I've always been fascinated about motivation. Why do we do what we do? And there's been many, many studies out about motivation, and people have talked about reincarnation too, but no one that I know of has ever actually done a study about motivation and reincarnation. So I became fascinated through the years of hearing about the mind, studying about the mind, and eventually I decided that hypnosis was a very powerful tool, very easy and yet very powerful tool to tap into the subconscious and to quickly and easily and effortlessly make changes for people in their lives and to give them a lot of insight.
Now, okay, let's start with what is the most dramatic insight you have helped people come to?
Just in general with hypnosis,
just
or
in
with
general.
Past lives?
Well, what's the, okay, we're talking two different things, past lives and just hypnosis, but basically they're one and the same, because if you're getting somebody to go into hypnosis, they're going back in time, but I guess not fully to past lives. I guess there's a break there.
Well, you can use hypnosis and just be in the present. And you can use that for things like smoking cessation, weight loss, and you can put positive suggestions into that person when they are in the relaxed hypnotic state and give them suggestions that when they in the future feel like binging, you know, on Saturday night when you feel like grabbing that hot fudge sundae.
Oh, sounds good to me.
Yeah, maybe after the show. But that if you do not want to eat that, that you can do something that will stop that. So we can work in the present to create new things for the future. So there's various things you can do with hypnosis.
What is the most astounding thing that you've done with hypnosis today, not somebody who's gone back in the past?
Well, let's see. I know that, you know, I've done the proverbial smoking cessation and weight loss. Just in general, I think insights into people's lives and perspectives about their lives, new perspectives about their lives. that they can empower themselves, that they can truly be what they want, who they want, and create their reality, to become a co-creator and to take responsibility. And I think just in general, I've been very happy about those types of things. I do performance coaching, and I have had
Quite
performers come, people who are country western singers, people who work for the Kennedy Center and the opera, they play in the symphony. And they come and they improve their belief in themselves, their belief in their talents and their abilities. And I just think that that's exciting, that we all
Certainly
can
is.
improve, that we can all be better. We can always be better.
Now, what about the reenactment? You've written 2 books here, one on Echoes from the Battlefield, which we'll talk about in a minute, and let's see, Echoes from Medieval Halls. Now, what would you say is the most significant thing that you've accomplished by taking these people back in time?
Well, again, what I wanted to prove, I wanted to do a study to actually see about motivation. Why do people do what they do? And people have always flippantly said, oh yes, well, maybe in a past life there was a correlation. So I started with a group of Civil War reenactors. I went to my first reenactment. I went on a torchlit, rainy, misty night to a fort in Fort Washington when I moved to the Virginia area, and there's a lot of Civil War history there. I went to this reenactment. Everyone was dressed in character. They seemed like ghosts coming out of the mist.
Wow.
And it wasn't just the look, it wasn't just the uniform, but the amazing thing was they felt and looked and related to the Civil War on an emotional level. And every question I asked them, whether it was what is their hat or how do you do this cannon, they had tears in their eyes. And I thought, this is more than a hobby. This is not your average hobby. This is not golf or tennis.
This is quite a passion.
There's something to this passion. And the more I talked to them, the more I went to these reenactments, I found that this interest bled into every area of their life. Not only the money they spent on their uniforms, they spent about $1,000 on a uniform,
Whoa.
if you include their gun and their camping gear and everything. And some of them even get married in uniforms. They
That's quite an
decorate their
obsession.
houses.
Would you say this is an obsession?
I would say it's nearly an obsession to some of the people. And I thought, why do they have this? What is it? Why do they have tears in their eyes when they're talking about something that happened 125 years ago or so? What is it? And some of them really looked more comfortable in their Civil War clothing, and they will tell you that they are, than in their 20th century clothing. Why is that? They even grow their beards specifically so that they can look more natural. So I decided to see if I could recruit some people, hypnotically regress them, and see if they would recall actually living in the Civil War.
Now, a lot of them did recall living in the Civil War.
Yes, they did.
And now, to document or to prove, you went out and did research and document what they had said. Now, let me ask you something. What would prevent them from finding the same research and memorizing it and just becoming so obsessed with it that it correlates to what you found? What evidence did you find that was actually them there to say, okay, this isn't a hoax?
Well, of course, you know, I would have liked it if some of them would have done documentation after the fact. I think the main thing, obviously some of these people knew some information about history. Some were more steeped in history than others.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, some of the reenactors weren't that knowledgeable about history, and that's what intrigued their fellow reenactors when they heard some of them coming up with the stories and the history, and they got the chronology right of the different battles, that all of this was right. They were amazed because some of their friends who were in the study really weren't that historically minded. There was one gentleman who had just been fairly new in reenacting. He really didn't know too much about the history. He was more interested in drilling and marching in uniforms and looking spiffy and looking good. And that was his specialty. That's what he really cared about. Well, it turned out that his was one of the best matches that I got in the archives.
No
one of
kidding.
The possible matches. And he had found himself being captured, taken as a prisoner of war, being in perhaps Andersonville, one of the prisons, and going through this whole scenario where first he didn't know what side he was on. You know, in regression it kind of evolves. You don't know what's going to happen from one minute to the next. And it turned out that he was probably helping he was a prisoner, and he was maybe helping one of the guards and then got stabbed. It was just a fascinating story. And then later on, he was released from the prison. And we did track down, and I did track down an identity that could have been the same identity.
How do you feel this influenced his life after all this?
Well, he said that he had more of a pride in his hobby of reenacting. He felt proud to be doing the reenacting, and he felt like he was more connected to the Civil War. Many of the people have ancestors who are in the Civil War, but he didn't have any. And so now I think he feels a renewed sense of, well, hey, I can
belonging?
do this. Yes, definitely.
Now let's go on to the medieval. What intrigued you about that? Because that's fascinating to me.
Well, in the same sense, I'd always been intrigued about, I've always heard about the SCA, Society for Creative Anachronism. And I didn't know what that was. I didn't know where to find these people. It seemed like a very kind of secret society to me. All I knew was that these people dressed up in medieval clothes, and it sounded fascinating to me.
I dressed up as Queen Elizabeth one time for a dinner party. And I can tell you, it was hot in June with all this wardrobe. I mean, it's amazing these people survived without passing out.
Isn't it amazing?
So I don't want to reenact, but
And it is interesting. In fact, I even wonder, you even have to question, why do people pick certain costumes? In Halloween, for example, especially when they're historical costumes. Why do they pick certain periods? Why do people like and are drawn to certain periods? Like you, for example.
Because, well, I was taking somebody else's place, so I'm not sure if I was really Queen Elizabeth I or what. But it's just fascinating to me that people think they were there. Now, how many people did you find that could be brought back, or I was going to say regressed, but let me just ask you one quick question.
Sure.
What's the difference between birthing or rebirthing and regression?
Okay, I'm not too familiar. I've never been rebirthed myself.
Okay.
But from the sense I get of it, rebirthing, you go back to your
the womb,
to the time of your birth, and then probably move forward.
Okay.
Now, in the past life regression, you can go back to the womb
Further.
and then before, or you can just go right back to a former life, you know, missing the birth of this life. So I'd say that's probably one difference about rebirthing. Also, I think rebirthing has to do with breathing, a lot of breathing techniques.
Oh, well, forget that.
I think. But anyway, yes, these people were regressed. And in my first study, I took 12 people and I regressed them to the Civil War. All 12 recalled lifetimes in the Civil War. And 10 of them were soldiers and 2 were civilians.
Now, did any of them go even farther back to medieval time, or you just stopped at the Civil War?
No, I stopped it there with that group, and then I took a totally different group. I took a group of people who recreate the Renaissance period and the medieval period. I took them back to see if they could recall lifetimes in the Middle Ages, which they all did. In fact, in those regressions, some of them had more than one, because the Middle Ages spans over 1,000 years. So it's quite likely that we had more than one lifetime during that time.
So would they get facts confused between one lifetime and another lifetime?
It's possible that they could have, although it didn't appear that they did.
Were you able to document any of their information, or
Now
no?
that was a lot more difficult. You know, I thought I was being real clever, because after spending a lot of time in the archives, I thought, oh no, not this again. I had spent so many hours in battlefields and talking to people on the Civil War, when I thought, well, I'll be really clever. There's no way I can track a name down in the Middle Ages. But what I didn't realize is I went from the frying pan into the fire, because I went from 4 years in America in a few states to over 1,000 years of time and many different countries and cultures.
And languages?
Yes, languages, costume, architecture. So I thought I was really being very clever, and I turned out I realized this was going to be hard. And I knew that I couldn't track it all down myself. First of all, I didn't have the specifics like names. So what I did was I cleverly thought of recruiting people who were specialists, and I got a Georgetown history professor to help me look at the regressions. And then I recruited a series of people who were good in different specialties. Maybe they were good in the, 14th century France, or in England, or Scotland, or maybe they were good with archery, or swordsmanship, or costuming, or architecture. And so I had these various people look at the regressions and make commentate.
Now, from based on all these regressions and reenactments of these people, did any of this information change their lives that you were able to substantiate?
Well, in the
medieval,
specifically in the medieval, there were some actually bona fide changes that they had in their lives. And actually, most of us therapists, hypnotherapists, do pass lives for healing. That's really why we do it. But in this case, this was something different. This was a study. But even in spite of this, there were many healing effects that came about. In one case, there was a man who had reoccurring dreams of loneliness throughout his life. He had these very sad dreams, and he'd wake up feeling very sad. And it turned out in one of his lifetimes, he found that he was a little boy, his mother died, and then his father died. He was given to an aunt. The aunt wanted to, I guess, shuffle him off to monastery school. So the kid goes off to monastery school, becomes very, very lonely, and says he dies of loneliness. He actually watches his funeral. He sees that, he says, nobody's there who wants to be there. He sees this very formal but very sad funeral, and this little boy who was very sad, dying of loneliness, and from that point forward, he never had another dream of loneliness.
Oh, is that
so
beautiful?
Going back, identifying a problem or identifying the root cause can oftentimes heal it, just acknowledging it and moving on.
Can one hypnotize themselves to heal?
Well, I believe you can, but it's a little bit difficult to do a past life. I would at least suggest a tape, because the problem is it's hard for you to be the participant and also the facilitator, leading back and giving yourself, you know, different things to do and different kind of leading. It's kind of more helpful to have a facilitator.
Okay, and that's what you are, a
Yes.
clinical hypnost. I can't even think of this. Is terrible. A clinical hypnotherapist.
Therapist, yes.
Okay, great. And how long have you been practicing this?
I've been doing this about 5 years, and I feel that it correlates to a lot of my other careers. It's perfectly correlated to my career as a reporter because I love asking questions.
Right.
So what I do as a regression therapist is I ask questions. Where are you now? What's happening now? Why is it happening? How are you feeling?
Have you, okay, I know you haven't had any problems, but what about the legal side of all this? As far as somebody being put under the spell and saying, oh, turn all your money over to me, or they put the clinical hypnotherapist, I don't believe I can't pronounce this. The hypnotist puts them under a spell to turn over their money or makes them do certain things or feel a certain way. Does that ever happen?
Well, I believe for the most part, you really are in control when you're under hypnosis. In fact, hypnosis, you are still, your conscious mind is still aware, and your subconscious is more raised. But still, I do believe, for the most part, you are in control, and you really can't do anything that you really wouldn't choose to do.
Okay.
I think, for the most part, that's a misperception.
Well, that's good to hear. If somebody wanted to be hypnotized, what advice would you give them?
I would say rapport is a big thing. So I would talk to the therapist on the phone, ask a few questions.
Like,
probably,
what kind of questions?
Well, you might want to talk about what it is you want, or what the background is of the individual that you're speaking with. I don't believe that you necessarily have to have an MSW or be a psychiatrist to do this. I think that they have many serious jobs to do, and I think that a hypnotherapist can deal with mainstream issues and help a lot of mainstream people. But I think, what is their background? What is their attitude? I think they can get a lot from just speaking to somebody.
You're also a Reiki master. What's a Reiki master?
Okay. Well, Reiki means universal life energy. And when you study Reiki, what you do is you tap into this energy. You are able to, actually through a series of initiations, basically, you are able to tap in. It's kind of like tuning your radio to a certain dial. And you tap into this energy, this healing energy. It flows through you and into another person, or yourself for that matter. You can help to heal yourself, or an animal for that matter. But it flows in, it just flows, and you learn certain hand positions to do a treatment on an individual, but you really don't if you forgot, as I even trained my mother, I trained my aunt who was 80 years old at the time.
That's great.
And I said, because it's like, I would rather teach somebody how to fish than give them a fish.
Right.
And I knew I wasn't going to be there to visit my mom all the time and help them when they weren't there. So I wanted to teach them so they could help themselves. It's a very simple process, and they were good sports. Anybody can do it. It's very easy. And I said, Mom, if you forget everything you learned, don't worry about all those things. Just use your hands. Just put your hand on somebody else. And she and everybody else has had excellent results, excellent results.
So what you do, it's like the heat from your body, transfers the heat onto that person's body, or?
Well, I think it's actually, it's not even your own energy, but it's this energy, the universal energy, because I think you have the intent to heal, and that you have taken this specific path, if you will, that you channel the energy through you. It's not even your energy. So it doesn't deplete you. In fact, it replenishes you. And that the person will normally feel heat, but it is a healing that they have used that energy.
I just got bumped here today. I'm going to have you do some healing after this show.
I'd be glad to.
I ran into the door jam just prior to taping here. You're also an intuitive counselor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what exactly is an intuitive counselor? Good thing you don't do very much.
You can tell I like variety. I like a good challenge. Intuitive counseling is, I guess you could say, doing intuitive readings to tap into an individual, a circumstance, and find out information. Usually what I do is I do psychometry, but I hold something, either your hand or a watch, something that you've worn, because that retains your vibrations.
Okay.
If I'm doing it on the phone, I talk to, I can just do it by tapping into the voice. Because our voices, our bodies, the things we wear carry our vibration. And in our vibrational field are the answers to a lot of the things about our lives. So I've been trained and to develop my intuition. Anybody can do it. Anybody can develop their intuition. I think we just need to pay attention more, trust ourselves more. I think it's a constant trusting. And as you start doing readings and counseling, you start to trust more and listen more.
And listen to that little voice in your head that
Absolutely.
says, go right or go left and find the $1 million or whatever.
Absolutely. We can all do it.
Oh, that's wonderful.
We can all do it.
Barbara, in the closing moments, I just want to talk about your book again. It's Echoes from Medieval Halls, Past Life Memories from the Middle Ages. I think it's great. I can't wait to read this one. And Echoes from the Battlefield, Civil War, Past Lives. And I think it's terrific. I started reading Echoes from the Battlefield, and I was fascinated, and I can't wait to read the one on Echoes from the Medieval Halls, because the information is just wonderful in here. If somebody wanted to do healing by, let's say, either intuition, by hypnosis, or Reiki, what advice would you like to leave the audience with?
I would say be open to all these modalities of healing. Go with your intuition. See what's good for you, what you think would be a good healing modality for you, and be good to yourself and explore these things, and to know that life is an adventure, and that through healing we can have a healing adventure, that it can be a positive, uplifting experience, that it doesn't have to be doom and gloom.
What major thing happened to you that you've used all these modalities?
Well, I had a life-threatening illness.
Uh-huh.
I was a flight attendant, as I told you. I had a lot of things going on in my life. I was going through divorce. It didn't look like a really exciting period in my life. But because that happened, I changed careers, actually. While I was going through treatments and therapy, I changed careers. I started taking television and radio classes. And the next thing I know, I was an anchor and reporter. So what really has helped me in my life, my kind of philosophy, one of my philosophies of life is that there's always a reason for things, even if we can't see them. And I think knowing that and knowing that there's a reason has always helped me. And even in times when it looks kind of gloomy, I realize that there's something good about this. There's something that I'm learning or growing, and that it's good. And
you're keeping a positive attitude.
Yes.
An outlook. And I just want to share with the audience a minute that Barbara had sent me 2 books, both of her books, and in the envelope they came priority mail, except for one thing. The envelope was ripped open and there was only the Echoes from the Battlefield in it. So there's going to be something more to why I'm so fascinated with the medieval halls here. and I'm going to have to read it or even go through a regression and find out where I was when I was and move along here.
You'll have to report back.
I know.
And maybe that mailman wanted the medieval halls.
Well, that's true, too. Too bad. I want. We'll have to track him down and find out. Oh, maybe we could do a regression on him and find out what's going on. Barbara, thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful.
It was a
really
pleasure.
was. And thank you so much for joining us today. And hopefully some of your questions have been answered by regression, Reiki Master, and also intuitiveness. And hope to hear from you. Please write me, Barrie Switzen, care of the Women's Connection, Ansonia Station, Post Office Box 918, New York, New York 10023. Or you can email me at Barrie, BARRIENYC, at worldnet.att.net, or even you can get hold of Barbara, Dr. Barbara Lane, at echoes2, that's 11, at AOL.com. Look forward to hearing from you. Take care. Bye now. It's been really terrific. The show was just too short. Tape media, courtesy of Quantigy.